it's a really fun night, and at the end, you actually get to ask anything you want.
Woo!
I did not agree to that.
We'll see how that
Okay,
goes.
let's do it.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've all seen in the newspaper and heard about all the things that are coming to the Strand. And the reason they're doing so well is because we passed this hat. This helps the Strand do so well. So we always pass this, put a buck in, it helps. Every dollar helps. So we just do that because we're so grateful that they open up their space to us so we can inform the community. And I'm just going to turn it over. We'll have some announcements and some discussion at the end. This is Allie Rosenbaum. She's part of the Vinspire team, and she's going to lead the discussion tonight. So welcome.
Thank you. It's so nice to see everyone. I feel like I actually haven't been outside in a few months. So it's nice to know that spring is coming, I think. So we're just going to start with our four gentlemen giving some background, who they are, whatever you think defines you, whether it be your career, position in life. So we'll just, who would like to go first?
Jeff, why don't we proceed?
I'll go first, sure. My name's Jeff Rendanero. I'm defined by my family first, my wife, my 3 daughters. I'm a grandparent now, which is really cool. And my job, I've been a stockbroker for way too long. And the things that I love, I'm a musician, like Adrian, kind of, except he's really good. And I've been doing that since I was a little guy, and I just can't stop. And I'd say, I live on a farm. I love to take care of the horses and the goats, chickens. I really don't like chickens, but I like everybody else. And that's it. I don't think there's too many ways you can define yourself. I don't want to talk about philosophy and politics. We can get into that later, and you can whatever, talk about all that good stuff. But that's who I am.
Okay, well, I guess I'm next. My name is Adrian Carr. I'm a composer and pianist, and I teach at the college. I teach in the communications department and in the music department. I lived half of my life in New York City before I came up here. I've recently, I was married in Montreal, and now I'm divorced, and I'm in a relationship, and so life is good. And let's see, what else? Did I leave anything out, Michael?
Nothing.
Okay, I like to cook.
Good cook.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm Michael Devine. I teach English at the college. And I used to define myself as being from Los Angeles when I moved here. And the trash man who I met the first day in Plattsburgh, I was putting on my trash, I swear, he goes, "Why the hell did you move here?" So that self-definition was kind of breezy and like West Coast. I'm actually from Philadelphia, and I'm the youngest of 7 kids. And I was called the old man when I was little. And I sometimes feel defined as kind of connected to a much older America, a much older world, much older masculinity in some sense. In the sense that a lot of my peers that I grew up with had parents who were like my older sister's age, right? So yeah. In terms of self-definition, I think of myself as a writer and a scholar and as a teacher and as an artist, as a husband. I have 4 kids. I have 3 boys and a girl. and 3 of them born in Plattsburgh, 1 born in Los Angeles. And in our time here, we've kind of grown majorly as a family. I spent basically my 30s in Plattsburgh, and so I'm kind of at the end of that period right now.
You're up.
My name is Colin McCullough. I've been born here in Plattsburgh and raised, and got my 3 most important women in my life sitting right here, looking at me. Mother and Megan, sister, and Lauren, girlfriend. Left here for college, went to Maine, and spent about 8 years away, and then moved back September 2017. I've been living here happily, and love being back in Plattsburgh, working at the family business, which is going great so far. It's a really good fit, and yeah, couldn't be happier with the decision to move back here. So if I had to talk to that trash man, that's we had to have a conversation.
That's right. You know, that's a whole nother panel.
Yeah. Issues with people the trash.
No, the whole panel.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's just a lot of beauty here. It was really great.
I thought you meant discrimination.
I knew you were talking about the North Country, by the way.
Yeah.
It is a big choice to live up here
Yeah.
and sacrifice probably fine and just, am I not allowed to talk yet?
No, I'm sorry. You could get us started. Because, you know, like, I had the experience, for example, of having to date up here.
Well, there you go.
Because I became single while I was up here. I mean, you know, and then I had, you know, my dating choices. And, you know, that's actually gone surprisingly well, but I wasn't really that optimistic when I started.
Tinder has revolutionized.
We'll get there. I think one of the reasons when we had this panel last year, for those of you that were here or that may have served on it, my husband was on it as well.
No, we had those were great.
Yeah, and it was variety. And you know, as I work with high school students and I have young women come in asking, you know, talking about different things in relationships and not really understanding boys or young men or wherever they're at in their ages, I think that a lot of times I'm not even understanding it when I'm home with my husband and we're trying to like parent children and we're speaking different languages. So last year was amazing and we wanted to do that again. Some of the questions might be a little bit different and have different perspectives from audience members. But one of the things, you know, I talk to my students about is trying to understand in a younger sense, but like influences of the young men they might be talking to, and you know, if it's their friends or their family, and what are the priorities. And so none of you were in high school and you're all in much different places. So yes, it can be a whole different world with young men, but for the 4 of you, what are some of the influences that you have had in your past and feel have helped shape you? Colin.
You want to go first?
Sure. In terms of manhood or man-ness, whatever it's called, or the roles of like men and women, I will tell you that I have a wife and 3 daughters, and you know, my family, my immediate family still lives in New York. I'm also from New York, refugee, I like to call myself. But I grew up with, there was 4 boys, and my mom and my dad, and I really had no frame of reference. And I went to an all boys Catholic high school, you know, which really gave me no frame of reference. I mean, you know, grammar school was, you know, that was mix, you know, but that was my exposure to girls who were girls at that age. You can't call girls girls now. After a certain, I've been schooled by my daughters who was giving me this great education. But you know, I think that in a lot of ways I'm a slow learner. But I think that part of it is I'm 62, right? So when I was a kid, it was, you know, Grandpa and all the guys sat around the kitchen table, the dining room table, and Grandma and all the women cooked, and then they cleaned, and they cooked, and they cleaned, and the guys just sat there and they waited on them hand and foot. And that's what, like, Sunday was like. And I remember, you know, my wife Nancy kind of rebelling at Sunday dinner and saying, why don't you guys get up and do the dishes and let me and your mom, since she's been cooking all day. And that was like, you know, little comments like, hey Jeff, why don't you take your girlfriend and like hit the road? Right? But it really was a different time. I mean, you know, I worked in big companies in Manhattan, and wow, you know, there really was like this like incredible amount of, I'm not really sure what the right word is, but it was definitely a man's world. I used to go into the city with my dad, and you know, and all the men were executives and all the women were secretaries. And they'd say, oh, you know, Lottie, take Jeffrey out to lunch, and she'd take me to Schraff's or something like that. There were very, very few women executives. My aunt was a woman executive. And she's still, my God, she is like a ball of fire now. She's like about 89 years old, and she is, you know, she was a really powerful woman, and still is. So that kind of shaped me, but it's been this really, I think there's been a really big learning curve, you know, because things have changed so much. Really, really a lot. And I've seen a lot of, especially in the business world down there, a lot of, you know, a lot of chauvinism, which was one word, and, you know, sexual, whatever it's called, you know, at work when, you know, guys are, you know, hitting on chicks that can't say sexual harassment. Thank you.
And it's called harassment.
That thing you can't do.
They're not chicks, they're not chicks.
Hitting on women who can't say no or afraid to say no. You know, all that kind of stuff. And that was commonplace. And, you know, and then I saw one of my bosses get fired from, you know, super duper job just for that reason. They moved him from Manhattan from running Merrill Lynch office in Manhattan to Scottsdale.
No, I never did it again.
He did the same thing in Scottsdale, and they transferred him. It's like Merrill Lynch is like a Catholic church, okay? They transferred him from Scottsdale to Hollywood, California. I don't know. I lost track of him after that, but you know.
Sounds like he was on
Ascension. He was ascending.
I don't know. So there's been a lot of
Yeah, but
change
in New York, in my lifetime, they built women's quarters in the Princeton Club.
Wow.
They didn't have a gym, you know, changing rooms, and they didn't plan on that, you know, and they had to, they've done that in my lifetime.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, so, you know, it has been, I think, a tremendous transformation. I mean, the thing is that I can't understand why, when I look on the cover of Billboard, why women are still wearing scanty clothes to sell music in the era of Me Too. I don't understand why they still feel a need where you have to take off your clothes to be a musician. I don't understand that. And the funny thing is, I brought that up in class the other day, in my world music class, and everybody seemed fine with it there, and I wasn't. They said, oh yeah, well, it's the internet, they gotta sell music and they just do this to sell and we know that. And, we've all seen it so many times because the young people today are just, grew up on the internet. They don't know a time when there wasn't internet. And so they're desensitized to a great extent. But I just look at this and I say, well, why do we still have that? Why? Why do we still have that in this era? Why can't people just do great music? Why do they have to worry about being anorexic or too thin or wearing this or wearing that?
But there's two kinds of music, like Bonnie Raitt never did that, right? She's like one of the best guitar players I've ever heard in my life, right? So it's maybe that's the pop culture world, right?
Influences, let's bring it back.
I'll talk about some influences. So I went to, in the Philadelphia that I grew up in, I went to a Jesuit prep boys school in North Philadelphia. It took me an hour and 20 minutes to commute there on 3 different public transportations every day. I learned Latin and German, and it was seen as like, I was on scholarship, it was like, life is in your hands. And I was kind of a quiet, very short kid. And it was kind of dangerous to do. But in my world, it was seen as like all about sacrifice. My aunt was a Catholic nun. She received her master's in math from Penn, one of the first women to do that. And my other aunt, who's really crazy, she taught Walt Chamberlain at West Philly High. She was a high school teacher. She lived alone. She was tough. She was short. She was kind of crazy, super smart. I grew up with like a lot of character women and a lot of character men. The idea of church wasn't something that wasn't like integrated into the fabric of the culture that you were part of. It was kind of like, the air that you breathe. Like you don't ask fish what they think of water, right? And so a big influence for me, I think, was that sense of a term the Jesuits had as MFO, man for others, where like you would go into the city and you'd work and we did volunteer, we taught kids at local schools. And it wasn't, you're talking about it as like that education was somehow strange, but for us, it felt like it kind of protected me in a lot of ways because like I was like obsessed with Latin poetry in 1994. Like I once went to a party and there was like people and I was like, are you people insane? Like I couldn't even put my mind around like what young culture was kind of like around me. There was a movie called, I don't think any of you, most of you won't know these parts of pop culture. There's a movie called Kids that a skater photographer made in the 90s. And it was like brutally raw. It was just, it was a really like advancement in film in some sense. But like if you were to watch it now, you'd be like, this was what people were watching. Like, and yeah, you could watch kids right now are watching 1 billion times worse on the internet every day in their phone. But this was like this thing, like it was in the 90s and it was like this part of the culture that was really changing. It felt like the culture was really changing in the 90s. Of course, it's the only culture I know, so how would I culture? But culture always is changing, right? And then the question becomes like, well, is it getting worse, or is it getting better, or whose view is it? That's a hard thing to make sense of. I mean, your point about music and everything. That's always hard, but for kids and for high school kids, and I taught high school as soon as I got out of college, and I lived at home. I did a master's at Villanova, and I taught high school from like 22 to 25 or something. And it was totally exhausting, and I would go home and sleep every night, and then wake up and do master's classes at night, and then I was dating my wife, and I'd drop her off in Philadelphia, and I'd go home, and I once fell asleep and crashed into a convent. I did. And I woke up, and I put my head through the and then there was like this guy, and he was a big guy, and I was like, oh my God, did I destroy your car? And he was like, no, you destroyed sister's car. So the idea that I kind of internalized was a lot of working and being part of a kind of a culture that around me, for good and for bad, kind of slowly frayed itself away. I ended up teaching at a boys' high school soon after, and it was kind of crazy. I mean, the school was like high school probably is, right? But you know, the models that I had were old-fashioned, but I don't know, I think it's easy to suffer from this kind of presentism where you're like, well, at least we weren't like them. I don't know. I mean, you know, a lot of my family and a lot of the people that I was connected to, they were very hardworking, and the culture around them maybe didn't always support them, but the women that I knew did what they wanted to do. They didn't usually need men as part of their lives. But you know, my mother, for example, is a nurse at a university right now, and she works full-time, and she's 86 years old. So she's also part German, so she's intense. But you know, that's just that was the kind of world that I was a part of. It was expected that you would be working and doing stuff, and I never had a sense of like, well, women can't do that, right? It was never part of my life. My sisters are lawyers and teachers, and yeah. So I mean, I think a lot of that modeling for me comes from that kind of family. And the reason I bring up the culture is because the culture kind of comes in and starts being a proxy family for you. And for me, the family was very important. But now I would probably guess that if your kid is 16, he's not studying Latin poetry. He's got a phone in his pocket, and he's got his influences, right, like right there. So, you know, that is how things have changed in a kind of pretty radical way, I think.
You're up.
No, I'll get in. You know, I grew up here. You know, I think early influences, you got to give credit to your mom and dad. And I think that I give them a lot of credit because they were always super supportive. And they'd tell you, I mean, it's a old cliche, but you could do anything. But then they'd be the ones actually making sure you got the support and got to the place that you needed to do it. You know, and so I got to give them like the base foundation credit for making sure that like jump started. And then you go out to Plattsburgh High School, and I really like talking about Plattsburgh High School with people who aren't from around here, because I think on the surface level at that time, you just think this is another place. And to me, it was weird when you get to college and you hear about their high school experiences to think that it wasn't like a regular place. Maybe it was to some people. Some people don't have the same experiences, but like you were encouraged to, you know, we had a huge chorus where we just sing first period, and it was encouraged to do that and play sports and invest in student government and do all kinds of different stuff, whatever it was, you know, that you had to put your resume together. And I just remember feeling like I can play football and I can run and be involved in school like government, and there wasn't like judgment there, and no one really cared. It was like a liberal arts experience in a high school. I don't know if that exists still, but I felt that when I was there, and I think that kicked my, you know, when I went into later in my life, that's something I really drew upon, was like, that, what do you mean that you're just an athlete and that's the only thing you do? You know, what do you mean you only do this one thing? Why don't you have like multiple interests? And a lot of friends would tell me, no, you know, you just ran track and that was what you did. You didn't do anything else in school. That was your identity. And so to me, that was very foreign. and it's something like special there that was captured in that time. And the only last thing that I'd give influence to would be I went to summer camp, and it's really crazy because you have your parents, and your parents are like they're like in careers, they're established, and when they tell you to do something, you're like, all right, mom, or like dad, cool, thanks. But what was crazy to me was when you're a teenager and you had 20-somethings counselors in your life, like how much you thought, you're telling me to do something, but I want to do it because I think you're rad, and how that was such a different feeling. So I had a lot of my counselors at that camp, all of a sudden you realize, whoa, I'm joking like them, I have the same cadence in my language, I'm laughing like them, and imitation is that the highest form of flattery. And I had that with like those guys that were just like 8 years older than me, and how that influence really carried me really through a big portion of my life. So I give them a lot of credit too. Yeah.
Then you became a counselor.
And then I became a counselor. They influenced me so much that I went on to work there, and I'd like to think that I passed that along to another group of young boys and kids, because that was so important to me that I wanted to pay it forward. So.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
You started to get a little bit into generational stuff, but how do you think being a man has changed from maybe the last generation or your generation, or how you would define that? How have things changed for you then and how they are now? Because things have changed a lot. You mentioned the Me Too time. We're in a totally different political climate. It's not the basis of this, but how do you see things having changed?
Should I pick this one up and then we'll throw it right back in line? We'll snake draft a little bit. Yeah, all right. I'll throw out there that, and this is just something that noticed from my dad, is that I feel like there's a lot of stigma has been torn down between probably when he was growing up and when I was growing up. And so therapy now, at least from what I know, it's not, and I think widely it's not being scorned as a sign of weakness, but it's actually like, yeah, you should probably go get that if you need it, which I think is like a really big step. And I don't know, I have had such enriched male friendships where we have been able to talk about, emotions and be vulnerable. And I'm very lucky for that. I'm not sure that that's something that's across the board by any means, but I feel like the needle's been moved just a little bit where, male mental health has been just a little bit more widely accepted. And I think that that's going to yield some hopefully good results, and hopefully that trend will continue, because I think maybe sometimes the previous generation's just propensity for not dealing with that could either manifest in good or bad ways, and it's good to kind of have that relief valve when you need it. And I've had that, so I'm lucky.
Yeah, I think it's easy. I'm kind of like a culture guy, so I kind of think that just the same way that the culture, I talked about family and culture. Culture can be this thing that's, we easily kind of scapegoat it, right? But I actually think it can be this very positive force in people's lives. I mean, one of the bigger influences on me as a kid was reading Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, and I saw The Best Minds of My Generation, yes. Hysterical Old Man. And I'm just like, wow, there's really weird people out there. My dad, born in 1934, these poems were published in 1958. Dad, what do you think about Allen Ginsberg? Bunch of hippies, lunatics. Like the way that, I kind of shaped myself by the kind of compass of American culture as it's kind of articulated itself in ways that my father has this great story. Well, it's not a great story to him, but it's an interesting story to me, is that he told me that when he was a kid, he was walking by a trash can, and there was a French horn in the trash can, and he brought it home to his dad, and he basically was like, and his dad was like, throw it out. His dad was like a food salesman, and he went into sales. But the idea isn't that like somehow what has happened is that men have discovered art. God, that has not happened, trust me. I teach English. No, more and more. I mean, males don't like pursue the arts. They're the lowest enrolled in a lot of these humanities and things like that. I wish that happened more, but I do see the culture around us giving kind of iterations of what you're talking about in ways that if you look at it actually is very humane and kind of healthy. I'm thinking of a film that just came out called Roma. Did anyone see Roma?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So there's a scene in it. I mean, to me, it's about women and men at a very basic level, but there's a scene in it where Cleo's boyfriend, Cleo's the maid, Cleo's boyfriend is naked in front of her, totally naked, full frontal nudity. You know, it's weird for films to do that with men, so that's kind of like a weird step in a direction. And he starts performing elaborate ceremonial, almost like kung fu gestures, and we will find out that he's a revolutionary, he's caught up in politics and all this stuff. But it's such a parodic parody of like just crazy masculine energy, right? Like he's doing kung fu, and she's just there, and this woman, you know, she's the one who mops the floor, she's the one making the dinner, she's the one, you know, bearing the children, which is in the movie as well. But like to me, there is a sense in which like, you know, generations before didn't even watch that. Like that is a statement that we are making to our art is a joke that a culture tells itself, right? It's always talking back to itself. And even in a moment like that, which is widely, you know, viewed, it shows to me that the world is always kind of changing in a lot of deep ways, if you're perceptive enough to see it, that we're telling a story about male behavior, which is crazy, right? Male behavior can be crazy. And, but I think we're at a point.
Just say. Well, you always say, "Oh, no, she's crazy," but do you think he's crazy?
But I just mean that, like, when you're at a point where you're telling these kinds of stories, I think there's something healthy about it, right? That you can kind of learn from. And so for me, yeah, that's one of my big influences. But I think it's an influence on the culture, which is a good thing. And I think the culture has changed in that way. That culture itself is telling stories about itself that are just different.
Well, my grandparents came from Italy, and so my father was first generation here. And, you know, it was very much, he kind of turned his back on a lot of ideas about, certainly about food. I mean, he didn't want anything green in his food, and he didn't eat pasta, and he changed his name. And he, like many immigrants, turned their back and wanted to be American. But he didn't really change underneath. I mean, the Italian values of what a woman is, what a man is, I think were very present for him. And I could never understand what he said, women and men are different. And I never understood quite the way he thought about that. And I said, why are they different? I mean, everybody's got the same emotions, everybody's got the same reactions, we're all, you know, working on the same game from a different angle. But it was, you know, I stood on his shoulders much like you do as an immigrant family, you know, you stand on his shoulders and you have more liberal views and you grow. I think, and then the culture, as you say, Michael, the culture's changed. And, you know, I mean, and it's changing even now, like at the college. I think that a lot of the old values that were like there are changing and the way a lot of people thought about things.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of, you know, the personal is political. I mean, it would be a kind of convenient narrative to say, like, you know, Me Too happened, and all of a sudden I became very conscious, and now very mindful, and it happened to everyone. You know, I mean, I think it's more that, like, those things happen, just like a movie like Roma gets made, because they're reflecting something
It's
in the
already
culture.
there. It's
Yeah,
already moved.
it's an
The
expression.
line is already moved, and it's just an expression of the
Yeah,
movement.
so when those things happen, you
Yeah.
don't, as a person, think to yourself like you're like amazingly shocked. Like, let me give you an example. The college thing that happened with the girl from, woman from Full House yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Like, that to me is actually an expression of that which is in the culture. It's
Yeah.
like, you know already
Sure.
how power and money work in institutions. These things happen. It's not like, what? Paradigm shift? No way. It's like,
Right.
so I view a lot of what's happened politically and with women's rights in much the same way.
Can I ask what happened?
Yeah, nobody.
I'm confused.
There's, what are you
A
referring to?
lot of celebrities and people that make a lot of money have paid off people to get their kids
Oh, the
into
college thing.
colleges,
Yeah.
to like
Athletic scholarships.
Yeah.
or
athletic
something, yeah.
scholarships, college entrance exam scores, have other, so
Falsified.
millions of
Yeah.
dollars,
Fraud,
yeah.
fraud.
So there's some sort of fraud thing that's just happening.
Yeah. Yes,
Okay,
like,
But it's
Yes,
been,
true.
but Michael, you're saying it's been going on
It's been
a
going
lot.
forever.
Well,
I'm
we all
saying-
assume that
what I'm
rich people
s-
can get
yeah.
their kids in fancy colleges.
What I'm saying is when events happen, and this is maybe like weirdly pseudo-mystical on my part, but you should actually think about how you feel when it happens, because it's usually like an iteration of a larger force at work in the culture. Like, Me Too happens and you're not like, what? Not in my America. You're like, yeah, there's, oh, I have stories.
But you
Right,
guys,
so
when it
that's
happened, that was the interesting thing, because you had Trump elected and a very conservative element coming in. And at the same time, you had the Me Too movement. It's like, as soon as one thing happened, the other thing just like broke out.
Right.
But that's why it happened.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was just like, yeah.
And that's probably where the college thing happened too, just because of the unequal distribution of wealth and power. And when a story like that gets out, it kind of blows the lid off something that everybody knows has been going on all through human history. It's part of being human, but that's what blew the lid off it.
Right.
I don't know, I mean, God, I'm selling such a millennial. Just to be on, just to, a millennial, just to be on Facebook that day.
That's the worst way to preface.
Yeah, seriously, millennials, they're just bumming, you know?
You're great, that's fine.
But just to be on social media that day and to see the overwhelming, no, me too, the day that broke, and you're just watching people post that.
Yeah.
And it's like you're just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And like, yes, you can say, in a way, you can say, oh, I know that, you know, I've been in uncomfortable situations or I've seen uncomfortable situations, but then you go, this is an epidemic. It's a little different than like, oh yeah, I've seen some like really things that weren't okay happen to like, wait, all of you? And that was what hit me, was like, all of you. And that to me, like was like a gut punch. Because I had like friends who came out and said that. Like, yeah, actually. And I'm like, what? And it's like, all of you. And that to me, you can say, sure, it's not a shock, but it hit me pretty square. I do have to admit. Made me reflect on some experiences I've had as a man that was like, maybe that wasn't okay. But yeah, I mean, again, I'm not trying to like be contrarian, because I think in a way, once you like take a few days, you go, yeah, you know, like the president has come out, he said on tape, that was like right there and still got elected. I mean, it just goes to show, it's like, yeah, it's just all over. So in a way I agree with you, but in a way like I was still shocked. I was still shocked.
I don't think
Yeah.
whether I was shocked or not is as much as my point as like the sheer fact that things are becoming visible is part of a kind of a cultural wave. It's you hear it with like police brutality. It's like did it just happen, or the fact that body
Sure.
cams now exist, record that recording is so omnipresent that you now see these things.
Well, to rewind to kids, you're saying, is it getting worse or is it getting better? Or is it just that stories are being told now
Yeah.
that would have been shoved under the carpet?
Yeah.
And I think that is the point, is that it's always been as bad as you now are. Is it getting worse? No, it's always been as bad. Now we're talking about it.
Yeah, I would add to the point of culture is that stories are being told, and stories themselves are part of culture. That is what makes culture. So now we live in a time of stories that are happening like this, rather than like E.T. E.T. came
Right.
out. Like, you see
Right.
E.T.? Yeah, I saw E.T. It's now like this kind of, and you're part of the story, and you can contribute to the story.
Right.
Do this.
Totally.
And there's something deeply democratic about that. There's also something possibly terrifying about it, that we're somehow authoring the culture that's happening now that is slightly maybe beyond our powers or something.
The stories might be made up or not made up, but may be co-opted to be used in a certain way.
Yeah.
You know, it's not all nice, exposing to make things better. It might be a lot of stories that are used. For instance, you know, like crime goes down, but when a big crime happens, it is played up like this happens all the time.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily happen all the time.
Right.
It might happen once in a while, but it doesn't happen all the time, and the overall trend is down.
It's used as a kind of symptom of
Yeah,
some larger
things can be
issue.
used.
Yeah.
Jeff, did you want to say something?
Well, I wanted to get back to the question that we started with, was how would things change, right? Since whatever, in our experience. And what Colin said struck me, that one thing like therapy is good, right? Or therapy is not something that men have to be ashamed of anymore, that men used to be ashamed of. But there was this, that old-fashioned, which now we call old-fashioned, idea of, you know, masculinity or
Old school.
yeah, whatever. That's a word.
better putting it.
That word, old school, to me, that's a new phrase. People started using that phrase like 15 years ago. I never heard it before. And there's a lot of phrases like that. But anyway, for me. And then what Michael said, that like his father took the French horn and tossed it to get rid of this, right? That these things have changed, and your family was Italian, and you became Carmen or Carlucci or whatever.
Right, that's right.
That's automatic, right? Which is my upbringing too. But my family was very, the guys, most of them anyway, were in some ways very sensitive to women. They were caring and you know, very protective, kind of old-fashioned. If you did something wrong to a woman, you immediately, there was immediate corporal repercussions, immediate. Just like you could say something about your mother, you can't do that, whatever. So I think that there were, I'm sure that in some families maybe that wasn't the way it was, but that there was a way that there was an old school way that men were supposed to treat women. And it was pretty strict and everybody knew the rules. And if you strayed outside those rules, there were serious consequences and, you know, chivalry and all this other stuff. But the thing that struck me is, of all these things that have changed, how much has really changed? Because you got this Me Too thing, right? Which is, to me, an immediate response to a guy like Donald Trump and his famous pre-election video.
Grabbing him by the pussy.
Yeah, right. That,
I was,
that in a normal world, or what we used to think was a normal world, would have automatically disqualified him for public office, to be any some kind of role model. You could grow up to be the president of the United States one day, you know, but it didn't. And it reminded me that things change, things happen, like the Me Too movement happened, but I remember, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when you told me what was going to happen here. We talked about Jermaine Greer, right? And we talked about feminism, which was my first experience when that started to happen. And, you know, then it didn't happen. Then it kind of unhappened. But it didn't really unhappen because, you remember I was talking about those chauvinistic guys at Merrill, right? But there were as many women stockbrokers in my office as men, which would have been, you know, would have been completely foreign in my father's generation, which was just one generation behind. So there was
But
some
now-
immediate progress.
Now we gotta get them to get paid the same.
That's an interesting thing from the salesperson point of view at Merrill Lynch.
Oh my God,
It's completely equal
right.
because it's all a function of what you produce.
What you produce.
What you
Yeah,
produce.
yeah.
But that's probably one of the few areas
Yeah.
that it's all in you. I mean, if you look at like CEOs of major corporations,
Yeah.
all of that stuff is so completely skewed.
Right.
So that's all I wanted to mention.
Can I just ask how old is Connor?
What's up?
You're the millennial in the group, how old are
Yes.
you?
28.
28.
Yes. You were a teacher
I remember
at
you.
Plattsburgh High School.
Yeah, I
And
remember
I was like saying that, I'm like,
I just feel like it's gotta be him.
man.
Okay, so we'll talk later.
Yeah. I'm a little worried.
I think we all have time.
some work.
I'm a little worried.
You had
What?
long hair.
I
You had
did. I was a floofy.
long, curly,
I had a
beautiful hair.
floofy.
as well.
I'm gonna switch gears a little bit, maybe lighten things up a little,
Sure.
but everybody mentioned they were in a relationship. Did you just give a look? What are some, and all in different stages in a relationship, what are some of the things that you look for in a partner or looked for in a partner prior to getting married? Some non-negotiables?
Or dating if you're not married.
Yeah, sorry. For those that are married, how have those things changed?
Look for a partner.
No.
What they got?
This is a hard one.
Maybe you should repeat the
Want
question.
me to-
What are non-negotiables about a relationship?
For you. Any of you.
I've never done online dating, which seems always like what I want in somebody. Like it seems like amazingly, on one hand selfish, but also kind of awesome. Like, wow, you can just like.
That's like a menu.
I never did that. I was never part of my dating. So yeah, I mean, one of the things about I've been married for.
I'm recording, Michael.
15 years, and I've been no real other relationships. I mean, some other relationships, but nothing significant. For the majority of my adult life. And one thing I'm struck by about a relationship, which I'm sure this makes sense to people who've been in long relationships, is like how much what you need in a relationship is majorly the idea of compromise. That the whole point of a relationship is that like you're both not going to get out of it. Like that's kind of like, and that sounds like not romantic. This isn't going to end if I'm going to do, be me in some way. So like the idea that people can give up something and still maintain the relationship, and that sounds like not romantic at all. But but what I realize is that's what I've gotten out of a relationship is that I've given up a lot of probably parts that I needed to give up and get rid of, right? Like the need of to be right. I like to be right. I like to be right. And this is probably resonating with women, maybe. But I just think that is a primal part of a relationship, which is not sexy or not part of a swiping culture or anything. That we sacrifice, we make sacrifices, all incredible sacrifices all the time. So that's a major part of it. But the something that sounds better than that is the idea of that one can be transformed and become a better person, and that you can be with somebody which you would never really be able to find. I guess swiping in the profile, no one could really say this. I will make you the best version of you that you should be. And that's what anything that's less than that, I would say, is a relationship I wouldn't be in, right? I wouldn't know. It's experiential. It's existential. How would you know? You need to be in the thing and be transforming and giving up something and changing. And that's how I see my relationship. I'm not my wife is here. I'm not the most sentimental and soft or romantic person on earth. I'm more slightly theological and existential. but those are big elements of the relationship. That the partner is in it.
I think that's really nice, because on those dating sites, you pick out all the things you like, and then you meet that person, and it's a disaster. Whatsoever. I mean, it's and you don't know what your next. Well, you don't know what that thing is that needs to be worked on, that needs to be polished, that needs to, you don't know what that is. Yeah, in you have no idea what that is. You're completely blind to it. You have no idea, and then you pick the wrong person, and they completely call you out, and you feel it didn't work at all. But why didn't it work? Well, actually, it just exposed that piece of you that wasn't the wish list. It was actually it's something else.
Red flag.
There you go. Right. And so, yes, in a relationship, I mean, as you work towards each other, you really find out what the other person is going to do, and to you, what you're going to do to them, and it's that polishing. But no, you never know. Going into it, you never know.
Dating sites couldn't really advertise themselves the way you just described it. You'll know what you're going into, and you're going to
Well,
You need
and
to
then
be
people
pushed,
lie.
right?
And then people lie. They'll tell
Oh, there's
you,
that.
They
Well,
do tell you what you want
It's
to
not
hear
even
too.
lie. It's not even lie. The guy, I was told by one woman I dated that, well, if you see a picture of the man and you don't see the top of his head, he's bald. Okay? And yeah, I mean, it's not even lying. It's what people leave out, because sometimes what people leave out is the most important thing, and it's sometimes buried. It's not.
Of omission, yes.
Yeah, I mean, you really find out as you go along in a relationship what's buried, what's there, what's not there. It's complex.
You need to be pushed to grow, right? I mean, maybe that's not comfortable. Maybe you don't want to.
Right.
Maybe you don't enter in unless you have that mindset in yourself. You don't really know that, and it's uncomfortable. But that's what you want, right? I mean,
We all want to grow.
hopefully we want to.
We all want to grow. I mean, the worst job is the job where you do the same thing every day and you don't learn anything, and it's always the same, and it's not interesting, but you're really well paid, and you just do the same thing every day, and that's killer.
I mean, I'll riff on those points, which is that my two most serious relationships before I met and started dating Lauren were competitive, hyper-competitive, where there was constantly a winner and a loser. And I think that is poison to a relationship. I'm actually certain of it. The cool thing, Lauren's right here, so I might as well just, I think the cool thing about our relationship is that we're very fair. If I'm wrong, I'll be like, I was wrong. I messed up, or I shouldn't have done that, and Lauren does the same, and that's that's a thing that I really value in her, as a partner, is that she's like, yeah, I was wrong. It's I'm not really used to that, and I'm going to go with that. I'm going to take advantage of that, and I think that the other thing is that if you got to have someone who's can kind of be a goofball, too. If you're super serious all the time, then that's gonna wear, So you got to have a way to make it fun and be goof around and so that it's easy and it's not tension and it's not competitive, Whereas in previous relationships it was this weird underlying competitive tension. Instead, that's I feel been really replaced with a lot of transparency and good communication and joking around, and it's easy. And people ask me, they're like, "So how's Lauren?" It's she's great. She likes me. I like her. We get along. Sometimes we go for a beer. We have a laugh. We don't fight. And they're like, "That's it." I'm like, "That's it. It's easy. It's really good." And I just and if it wasn't like that, we would have broken up. So yeah, I'm very lucky, but I spent a lot of time kind of in that oh my God, what am I doing wrong? And I think that I had to conquer some demons and talk to some people and get some therapy, and then I wasn't projecting something onto somebody, if there's a past trauma, I'm not projecting that on to my partner who has no idea where that's even coming from, and so I kind of was able to work through some of that, the weeds of that. And so by the time we started dating, I just was yeah, I know my traumas and I know what they cause, and I'm not gonna project that on you at all. And she's like, "That's great. I'm really glad that you've done that work before I started dating." I'm like, "I know." Cool. I'm all right, can we just date and have fun? Great. And that was it.
That's exactly how it went, too.
When you said, "What do you look for?" Is that what you said? What do you look for when you?
What did you look
Right. We haven't dated in a long time. We've been married for many, many, many years. And it's hard to remember, but I do. I do. But when you asked that question, the first thing that I thought of, right, this afternoon, I said, "What am I going to do this thing? What am I going to do?" So I wanted to be prepared so I went to the website and said, "What do men wish women do?" Or something, right? So I Googled, "What do men wish women do?" Or what do men wish women do about men? And there was 50 things, right? So I was talking about this before.
Where?
I had to put it in a number.
First page.
50 different articles on 10 things you want, 6 things, 5 things, the 10 most important things. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is going to be crazy. But the question sort of reminded me of that kind of thing, or the dating website thing, which, I have no clue. I didn't even do Facebook or whatever. But what I realized I was looking for was, when I met Nancy, is that she was willing to pretty much let me be what I wanted. Let me be who I wanted. She didn't try to change me and turn me into this or that or the other thing. And she accepted me completely, which is a miracle, I'm not kidding, for who I was and for who I am. And she didn't, she didn't say, "You've got to go do this," or "I think you should do that," or "I want you to be a better person," or "become the best part of yourself," or whatever that was. But once we had kids, then that all changes anyway. So once you have kids, then the whole thing changes, and then you kind of wind up changing yourself automatically, I think, at least maybe we should, or it just happens, I don't know, even know, whatever, it just happened by itself. And then things change by themselves. But among all the other things that attracted me to my wife, it didn't, you know, I didn't have to run away because I could continue to be who I was. I didn't have to be somebody else. So I think that's an important thing.
100%.
Do we want to open it up for questions from the audience? This is your chance.
I want to thank the four of you first for being so open and honest, and it's been informative and very touching at your honesty and your candor, which you don't often hear men, at least for me, where I come from, I don't often hear men really talk about how they feel, and I think it's great, first of all. So this is a question that you may all have a different answer to, and you don't necessarily all need to address it, but Jeff used the term powerful woman. And I don't know what anybody means by that term when they say that. What exactly do you mean? And is a powerful woman somebody you see as approachable, someone you can be comfortable with, or is a powerful woman somebody you have to walk on eggshells and watch what you say? That's
The context that I was using it in, I think, is interesting because I was using it really in the context of she was as powerful as any man in her professional world, but she had to be twice as strong to get there. My grandmother, her mother, one of the things she used to tell me was, and she worked into her 70s, and I think they made her retire when they found out how old she was. And she used to say, one of her little pet things was like, this is what she'd say, all men are bastards. She had a bunch of sisters too. She came from a family of all girls, right? And she, except for my Pete, her husband. But she was really tough. She was a strong matriarch, and she had 3 very strong daughters. But the oldest one, Aunt Marie, was, she was very strong. But that's the context.
okay.
So I guess if you say a strong woman, it's interesting because it kind of means that, and that there's not strong women. You know what I mean?
Well,
in relationship to men, there are weak men all over the place.
Yeah. But when I hear the term powerful woman, I don't think people necessarily mean strong in the same way that just a strong woman is.
She was powerful.
Okay. Anyone else want to add a different twist to that? What's it mean?
I don't think anyone that you have to walk on eggshells around is necessarily, in my mind, like, I mean, that was your definition.
No, that was my question. I didn't have a definition.
That was your image.
I'm trying to get the definition.
That was your image that you gave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that wouldn't be somebody in my mind. I think of any person that's powerful or strong. I do think, I think a lot of us probably think of our mothers, people who have sacrificed in front of us for years that we can kind of like, these are archetypal images in our mind. And so I think of people who are community builders and are just kind of generative, like they build and create wherever they are, in whatever circumstance that they're in, and include people in that, and I think, the mother is an interesting emblem for a society which is like single serving, because the mother is a figure of like creativity.
Selflessness.
Yeah, but also just like generative bridge building between, between peoples, like forging social relationships everywhere. Maybe there's something kind of stereotypical in that view, and but and I'm not talking just biological, I'm talking just like at a cultural level. And I think,
Horizontal.
yeah, and I think there may be something about why that, you know, the moment that we're having now is important and valuing women in a new way, maybe. Because I think as a society, we're like looking for authentic connections. Like we have connections, but do we have connections? And I think women maybe are being seen in that light in a way. But yeah, for me, that comes to mind, that kind of image of somebody who can forge the kind of connections that we need.
Yeah, I mean, I would riff off of Jeff. I think I've traditionally used it in that way when I've used that term. But I do think that what this kind of brings up is, it's just, I have never thought of that term, kind of like the ambiguity and different connotation there. I think just someone who's just unabashedly themselves, is so comfortable and you know, really loves themselves and who they are. I think that might be how I start using that word, because I think that might be more of an area, a sense of strength than, you know, for, you know, and this is unrelated, but you know, I don't use the word slut, like it's just not in my vocabulary, but I do use the word stud for a woman. So that's something that changed for me. So that seems weird because you think of a guy as a stud, oh, he's a stud, he gets, you know, he hooks up with all kinds of people. And I just started using that as a gender neutral term because for me, I was like, yeah, she can get, you know, she hooks up with all those guys, like, good for her. You know, she's a stud. You know, it's not like a negative thing. Like it shouldn't be negative. Like that's great that she is so comfortable. You know, in those like situations that she is comfortable enough with you know, knowing her, knowing that person, that I was like, that is like a form of confidence. It shouldn't be. That's just one way, maybe a different way of using it. But I just think that like that might be more of a strength of like power than just like somebody who is kind of like in a business, you know, the businesswoman who like cut through, rise to the top no matter what. So anyway.
Remember, I think about a lady from Vermont who was a legislator, and when the girls had the Italian ice booth down there, down by the thing, and that was their college fund, and she stopped my daughter and said, "Oh my God, where'd you get?" She was reading Pearls in Power. And I said, "Where'd you get that book?" And she said, "My sister gave it to me." I said, "Where'd you get it?" I think my mom gave it to me. So she was so impressed that, you know, this little high school girl in Plattsburgh was sitting there reading, you know, reading that book.
Better pull in those college tips.
What's that?
Said you gotta pull in those college tips.
That's right, pulling in those college tips. But that's another kind of power. But you know, she was talking political power. So it was, I guess.
I have a quick question. If you had to say, because I know we're going to a close here, one thing that scares you, what would it be?
One thing that scares us.
Yeah,
Scares me.
scares you.
About what?
What scares you? What scares you?
General.
Yeah. What
Sharks.
scares you? Sharks. You can say anything you want.
Eaten by animals.
Colin's afraid of getting eaten by a bear.
That one wasn't on the list.
All kinds of things scare me.
You have to pick one, Jeff.
Can I say something?
Pick one.
Like along the lines of that, just that you guys were great, and in talking about your whole, you know, the word that comes to my mind is perspective. How you grew up and how you were shaped and everything. And Michael, you said how your college students, you know, they look on their phone and they get stuff off their phone. And to me, it's like it's a little bit of a loss of perspective. Like what older people see, you know, what I see is, you know, I have a grounding and a big experience of growing up, but then the country sways daily on what somebody said or what was filmed and put on the internet, and there's a lack of perspective. That's what, I mean, that's what scares me.
Thank you, Rob.
That's what I kind of heard you say
Rob,
a
that
little
was
bit.
last
Yeah.
year's answer.
It actually helped give me my answer, because I think one of the things that scares me, I mean, it's hard, it is a hard question for anyone to answer, I think. But I think to myself, what things like really bother me, and one of them is the idea that my children will turn out like. That is definitely a scary thing. And you can sway in two different ways. One of the ways that you can sway, which was like my father way as well, was like you can try to over control and manage. You like, no, I will create kids who will not do that. You know, they will be readers and do X, Y, and Z. But you really want to kind of build people who have character, who are capable of navigating the world and have good character and all of that. And I do think sometimes, I just want to say, one of the things that I think that I grew up connected to, like, in my mind, a lot of my life is in my mind, that I'm like connected to this old world thing. But I think part of what I'm connected to is like ancestors and wisdom that has come before me, that I sought out. And even older people who were around me when I was young. And one of the things that I'm afraid of now is the way that life is lived that is very compartmentalized. So my kids live and they watch their little stupid Netflix shows nonstop. You know what I mean? Like, and they don't watch, I don't know.
No,
something else. But it's like
Yeah.
integrated into life. It's like integrated, or that they have, and I don't have family around. I don't have older people who are, it's like on me and my wife all the time. All the time.
They don't have the sense of the
They
culture
babysit
that kids are
her
for.
all the time. Yeah, so it's just like life that feels like it's kind of integrated into the children's experience. You want them to turn out to have character. And if I fear, you know, and that comes from anyone who works for students now. Anyone who, you know, you're around people who are compulsive, they're compulsive. And that ability, you're just like, man, life is very long. If you're like this when you're 19, I say this to them sometimes, I'm like, you're gonna be 33. Yeah, 33. And even then, you're gonna be like, oh, I'm only 33. I'm like, more and more. Like, it just keeps going, right? And like you really need to control. You know, you need to build the character at some point. So that's a big fear. Anyone who has children, I think, can probably identify with that. Anyway, sorry.
No. That was, yes. I redact sharks and bears. And as half as a joke and half completely serious, my probably biggest fear is that my children will grow up to be jerks.
That's everybody's biggest
And they'll be
fear.
insufferable human beings, and I will have created these monsters.
Right.
That is the fear.
That's universal, right? No?
Yeah, and
Yes.
you know,
Okay.
and you have dreams of like, I will you're contending with a lot, I think, as a parent. I'm not one now.
I'll have a
I'm
designer,
surprised now
designer
you
baby that I
Yeah.
afraid to sit up here and expose yourself like that. That seems like frightening to me. Like, and what you did was great. Like,
Did you have a fear?
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't parent. I've never parented. So I can't have those fears.
That's
I,
you know, from a totally male standpoint, we're all supposed to say, I ain't scared of nothing.
Yeah.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
I think there's a million things to be afraid of,
Mhm.
you know.
climate change.
Well, illness.
Climate change,
I think mobility.
mobility, you mean
Yeah.
personal mobility,
Yeah,
like thinking for yourself,
yeah.
physically.
That's my biggest
But also,
fear in life. Is just like how I'm going to go forward. And you know, not only physical mobility, but financial mobility and all the mobility. You know, I like. It's very important for me.
Yeah. I was, you know, like the other day, I was playing the guitar and I got this crazy pain in my finger and I'm like,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, there's that.
what?
There is that.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. And then you start to,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
start to to rip on that, you know. To use Colin's word, right? But, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
So while I was trying to think of all the things that I could be afraid of, I don't know that there's any one thing that is one overbearing fear, which is maybe good. And either that or there's so many things that we can be afraid of everything. My first thought was,
before I go to bed, because the list is long.
Yeah, right.
And then you become crazy.
So,
What was your first thought?
my first thought was, I've been feeling very uncomfortable about the world lately.
Yeah.
That's my biggest fear probably, is not, I think that this is great, but there's a whole lot of other stuff going on out there that's not great. And I worry about the kids, and I worry about my kids, and I worry about grandchildren. I worry about, you know, that kind of stuff, you know. Going forward, I think that it's a national epidemic, if you want to call it that. I don't know what I would call it, but it's, you know, there's a lot of bad stuff going around, and but I think it's going to get better. I honestly do. I think it's going to go away. And I think like that whole thing about like how like Me Too was a reaction, almost immediate reaction to a guy like Donald Trump, you know, getting elected or even running for office. Immediate reaction. That's good. And there's good. There's good stuff happening because people automatically fight back. So that's kind of
reaction.
Yeah. I want to say thank you for, I know Sally's going to give some announcements, but thank you to the four of you for coming and being vulnerable. If you have more questions, they can hang out.
I have to say, that was really refreshing, thank you. And I believe we can change the world, like, with conversations like this. And if we're daring enough to have those with the people that we interact with, that's what changes things. And these small little gatherings are so powerful. So thank you. I think this could go on and on. It was really a great, eclectic, wonderful group. So
They're only paid for like, they're at the end of the paid period.
right. Time's up. So I'm just gonna, we'll have some announcements about what's happening in the community, and please feel free to add things. I think there's great things happening at the college right now. It's really exciting to read in the paper the interviewing process and see what maybe can happen. So I'm excited about that. Next, in 2 Wednesdays on March 27th, Sex in the City. Here's one of our stars. Rescheduled, and if it snows, we don't care.
No shoe here. Okay, that sounds right.
And then Wednesday, April 10th, it's Medicinal Herbs of the Adirondacks with Jane Desitel, and she is a grower and a speaker and a healer, and I think she'll be wonderful. Beyond that, our May 8th and June 12th. On May 8th, Ali Randinero is going to host, and it's, do you want to say a touch? We haven't really worked up the...
Yeah, I don't know what the slogan is, but it's about the birthing community in the area, and I'm really excited, and we have some wonderful speakers, and, you know, anybody that
and
wants
believe
to
it or
talk
not,
about
we're all
birth.
connected to this birthing community, and we were recently connected. And I learned a lot about doulas and midwives, and I have a great friend that's a midwife, and I think that we're all responsible for this next generation. It's really important to be informed and to know about that. And then on June 12th, Ryan is going to be speaking. We're not sure about what, but he is so wow, capable. And he's a motivational speaker, but you're also a physical therapist, a massage therapist, so many things.
Yeah.
And we don't. Do you want to say anything?
We'll talk. I have an idea.
So this all comes to you online, and if you want to be, if you're not on the email list, please let me know, and I'll get you on. And then Dana.
Yeah, March 30th at Myers Fine Arts, Adrian will be doing a concert at 4 p.m., his piano concert. 4 to 5-ish, 4 to 4:30. 4, at Myers Fine Arts in the lobby.
Right in the lobby.
Right in the lobby.
It's during open house weekend.
Yeah, that's the
That's my
30th.
birthday, so I was just.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I was playing for you, of course.
And then the 31st is Lori's? Is it, the next day is
Oh,
Lori?
yeah, the next day, yeah. Yes,
You want to-
Lori Salamondo Porter, who's a trombone player, came to us from the Marine band from California, and she teaches at the college. She's doing a concert, but she's doing a premiere of a piece I wrote for her.
Wow.
So,
Mhm.
yeah, it's like a back-to-back weekend that weekend. And actually, Michael's performing with me at the college.
Yes, he's singing two of the songs,
Yes,
yes.
him and his wife were both performing with me at the college.
On my
30th.
birthday?
Yes. Exactly, yeah,
Wow, I'll be
Yeah.
there.
yeah.
All right.
Sally, a couple things. Eagle Mania is here Friday night, and I know the new executive director of the Strand has added so many shows. So if you are looking for some more variety and everything, just check out the website
There's
here.
like 2 things every weekend.
There is, and they're kind of like, they're adding, I wanna say comedy and music and other things, so it's
Yeah.
not just one type of art. And then the other thing, on April 29th at the Newman Center is the Evening of Healing Stories of Strength, 5:30 to 7. And it's an hour and a half. What it really is focused on is where your strength comes from, maybe not, what happened, but why you're strong, so.
Yeah, we talk a lot about resilience and hope, so
Mhm.
it's moving forward. It's a beautiful, very touching night. So, anybody else have something to?
Yeah, April 4th, our Reading Between the Wines book club group meets at Oval Brewing, so it could be reading between the brews if you want. We're reading The Great Alone. I'm sorry, I can't remember the author, but we always meet the first Thursday of every month. It's at 6 o'clock. We only go 1 hour. Everybody's welcome. You don't have to sign up. You can just come in. We meet in the upstairs room, so it's very private, and we always have a good time. Everybody's welcome.
Anybody else? Oh, thank you so much for coming.